I haven't seen them yet.
We can all take our seats. We're going to get started. I want to be faithful to our time.
All right. Okay. Well, we're going to get started. My name is Kevrick McKain, and one of my jobs is actually assisting a great group here in North Carolina called Americans for Citizens Voting. It is an outstanding group that is grassroots in orientation, and really, I think, speaks to a lot of the core values that I have, really, which is activating citizens, but also the value of voting and the importance of voting for citizens in the United States, and how important that value is, and what it should mean to all of us, and particularly those who are African Americans, because it's something that took quite a bit to actually get. And we're going to discuss certain of those things today. But I did want to thank all of you for coming today. And I wanted to open it up with a word of prayer. And then after we have prayer, I'm going to introduce the head of Americans for Citizens Voting. And then we'll get right into our program. The program will be divided up into what I call a historical look at voting, and then a present-day look at the value of our vote, and then also a discussion with a great American who's a friend of mine who did something really, truly historic in this city 63 years ago. And I think it's very important that we hear part of those messages today. So let's pray. Father, we just thank you for today. Thank you, Lord, for all that you are doing in our midst, Lord, for this generation. And so, Lord, we commit this meeting unto you. We ask you, Lord, to bless it, bless the folks who are in it, their families. Lord, and let us learn today, be educated today. And so we bless you and we thank you for it now. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen. And so again, my name is Kevrick McKain. Some of you guys, a lot of you may know me that I'm the Executive Vice President of the Douglas Leadership Institute, which is a really exciting job that I have. It can be challenging sometimes because I'm never around, and I tend to be on the road 3 to 4 days a week. But it is really exciting to be back in the state of North Carolina with a lot of my friends, friends from across some friends from across the state, and one young man who my family is really proud of. I know if my wife was here, there's a young man who's here. His name is Christian Prescott, who was one of the first, before it was vogue for private schools. There was a lady that I knew. I actually am married to her, and so she had a vision to have a private school for kids in urban communities, and so we had to fund that in Durham, North Carolina. And one of the best students that was in that school is actually here today, Christian Prescott, who went on to a number of schools. He's going across the country doing things in the medical field, and so he's friends with my son, and so I'm really happy. I'm taking a moment of professional privilege here. I'm really happy to see Christian here, and so I thank God for you, and I appreciate you, young man, for coming. So I wanted to introduce the head of Americans for Citizens Voting. He's a good friend of mine. His name is Paul Jacobs. Paul is actually a grassroots activist in terms of on a number of ballot initiatives from across the country, from everything for when you talk about high taxes, or when you talk about term limits or other things of that nature. Paul has been integrally a part of those things from the beginning to make sure that we, the citizens, actually have a voice in our electoral process. And so Paul hails from Virginia via, I guess you could say, Arkansas, and he again, has a great passion and is doing something, frankly, on this issue that is different than people do anywhere in the country, which is saying, hey, I want to expand what is, with a lot of people, look, we're going to be frank here today, okay? What a lot of people would say is an issue that we don't see a lot of in minority communities. But Paul said, look, I want to go to folks who I think it's important that they be educated on this issue and that they learn about this issue, because in truth, your vote matters, but when people who aren't citizens vote, it dilutes some of our votes. Let me be right up front with you so that you'll know. It dilutes some of our votes. And politics is about a game of whoever gets the most votes wins. I mean, that's how the game is played. Yeah. Whoever gets the most votes wins. And if you win by 1 vote or you win by 100,000 votes, you win. And there's a certain amount of power that goes with that. And so we want to talk about that particular issue today. And so if you all would join me in welcoming Paul Jacobs, the head of Americans for Citizens Voting.
Thank you very much, Kevrick. It's been a real pleasure to get to know Kevrick and Timothy and others that are working on this effort in North Carolina. This next election in 2024, I have a question, and I wonder if you've given it any thought. Will the Chinese ambassador to the United States pass the vote that decides the next election in Washington, D.C.? I mean, we might as well be thinking that KGB agents working out of the Russian embassy will be voting in Washington, D.C. Both are true. It is true that Washington, D.C. passed a law, the city council did, that allows anyone in Washington, D.C. for 30 days, whether they're in the country legally or not. If an invading army came through Virginia and got into Washington, D.C., as long as they're there for 30 days, they can vote. This is somewhere close to insanity. And almost everybody realizes it, but it keeps happening. You know, New York City, about 2 years ago, voted to allow non-citizens to vote. This is the city council. We did a poll at the same time of the voters in the city, of the New Yorkers. They were more than 2 to 1 opposed
to non-citizen voting. This means now in New York City that nearly 1 million non-citizens are eligible to vote. 100,000 Chinese nationals are able to vote. Now, I like people who are Chinese just as much as I like any other people. But if they're nationals of the People's Republic of China, they may be told how to vote by somebody somewhere else. This is why we have basic rules. And let me explain why this has happened in the first place. We're not talking about, oftentimes people will talk about illegal voting, non-citizens, illegal aliens who are voting. This is not what we're talking about because they're voting illegally. We're talking about them voting legally. And that's something that we can step up and stop. Right now, in New York City, in Washington, D.C., in San Francisco, in Chicago, back when they had a school board that was elected, in 11 cities in Maryland, in 3 cities in Vermont, in 6 cities in Massachusetts, non-citizens are being given the vote. And again, at Americans for Citizen Voting, we love immigration. This country wouldn't be the country it is if it wasn't for immigrants. We want them to keep coming. But we want them to come legally. And if you're going to vote, you ought to join the country. If you're going to vote on building a new church or not, well, you really have to join the church first. If you're going to vote on where we're going to go on vacation in my family, you actually have to join the family. You got to be part of the family. These are not crazy, mean ideas. These are common sense, sensible ideas. And so looking at all this non-citizen voting, and it's always here and there, they push it, and then they act like, oh, no. We had a situation earlier this year in Texas where non-citizen voting, an amendment, passed 29-1 in the Senate. Most liberal senator from Austin, the only one voted against it. In the House, it comes up, and 54 Democrats voted present. And they voted present because they couldn't stand the idea of voting against the amendment because they realized someone's going to call them out on that. And so they just blocked it. They say they're not for non-citizens voting, they're for citizens-only voting. But then they block the very measure that would make that happen. So I don't quite trust them. But over the last 3 cycles, we have passed what we call COVAs, citizen-only voting amendments, in 6 states: Alabama, Colorado, Florida, North Dakota, Ohio, Louisiana. The average vote has been 76% yes. And so there is something we can do about this. And if you're wondering, well, how did they ever get away with this in the first place? It's a very simple thing. If you look at the state constitution here in North Carolina, and almost all the states have this similar language, it says that every U.S. citizen is an eligible voter. You know, if you're incarcerated or if you're not 18 yet, you know, there are other reasons you might not be able to vote, but as long as you're a U.S. citizen, you're an eligible voter. And most of us figured, well, okay, that's who's eligible. But the courts in a number of states have ruled that that's a floor. It's not a ceiling. And so it means that if you're a citizen, you have to be allowed to vote if you meet the other requirements. But it doesn't mean they can't give the vote to somebody else. And that's what they're doing in a lot of these places. So here in North Carolina, we're urging this legislature to do something about it. And we recognize, look, with what's happening in Gaza, with what's happening in Ukraine, with what's happening in a lot of places in this country, this is not the issue that the most people are dying about. This is not an issue that tomorrow is going to destroy the entire country. We're not, you know, breathing some kind of fire, oh my goodness, this is the end of the world. But this is a very simple, straightforward, common sense issue. And if we can't get our government to get their heads together and solve something like this, and solve it before it becomes a problem. Once Asheville has already decided they're going to allow non-citizens to vote, now it's a big fight. And now they're going to accuse us of trying to take somebody's rights away. And as Kevrick said so well, and then I'll close up here, this is not just an issue about somebody who's voting who's not supposed to be voting. It's about someone who has a right to vote having that vote canceled. And, you know, I don't have anything that I can tell this crowd that you don't already know about how precious and important this right is. And that's true for everybody, but it's the sort of thing that in this country we've come so far. Don't let it all slide away. It's a simple vote. Should citizens be the only voters, or should non-citizens be voting? That's the issue. Let's demand that our legislators put that issue up to the voters and let us decide, because some of them will say, oh, we already have good laws here in North Carolina. This isn't such a problem. There is a law statewide. Of course, they could repeal that. And it doesn't necessarily stop local cities from doing stuff. But there'll be a lot of disagreements about what could be done or not be done here in North Carolina under the law. Lawyers will argue all day and night about it. But the one thing we know is if this is in the Constitution, it cannot be taken away from us without them coming back to us to vote. That's why we want to see this in the Constitution. That's why we want to vote next November in 2024. And this is something that is important, and it's important to set a baseline of common sense on this issue.
Thank you, sir. All right. So one of the reasons also in terms of when we have these events is we think it's extremely important that we kind of give a historical and a current event kind of look at voting, particularly when you deal in the African American community. And it's not necessarily, it's what I would call it's an interesting way. I think Spike Lee describes, he says, American history it's complicated. Because it's complicated because while we have talked about freedom and literally people coming over on ships, but there was also a group of people that came over on ships, but they came over like sardines on a ship. And that's complicated. It's hard sometimes to wrap your mind around that. And I actually think it's also something that we should never really forget. It's not something that we should live in, but it is a part of our past that makes us who we are. And I think it would be wrong and disingenuous when we talk about this issue, because it is complex, not to talk about how that relates to many of the folks who are in this room that look just like me. And so we're going to spend just a brief period of time to talk about voting and the history of it in North Carolina and what that has meant and the challenges that we have on that particular subject. And really when it came to African Americans, it really didn't matter until what Lincoln called this Great War with the Civil War. It didn't matter. Blacks were slaves, and they could not participate in the process at all. That changed, obviously, after the Civil War and after what was probably the most deadliest time. If you combine all of the American wars all together, you will not find as many casualties as you found and deaths as you found in the Civil War. You can combine them all together, and you'll find more deaths in the Civil War than all of our other wars put together. It's an amazing fact when you think about it. And so in that, what we would call almost like sea of blood, came out a time that you actually saw African Americans actually participating in the electoral process. And really, it's kind of a brief 25-year period, basically, or 35-year period, but I would really say it's basically late 1860s to 1900, where you saw black folks actually participating in the process like you had never seen before. Matter of fact, there are 111 black folks, at that time they happened to be Republicans, who were in the state legislature in North Carolina. We had a C in what they called the 2nd District of North Carolina, that you had a number of black representatives in the United States Congress. But that began to change, and North Carolina was a little bit different than most states in this way. They started passing black codes right after they pulled the troops out of the South after 1876. It was just massive black codes all across the South, the old Confederacy. It was just all over the place. There was one tiny place, though, that you actually did see blacks actually still retain voting rights. It was right here in North Carolina. And it happened really up until around the 1890s. And then what happened was there were two, and actually I would call it three, but there were two Democrat governors, that one that actually had a school here, that I think they renamed like a couple years ago, Charles Aycock, and I think it's Governor McKain, and I think at the time he was like a U.S. attorney. And so what they decided was, we're going to be just like everybody else, and we're going to pass what we call literacy codes, which unfortunately is still on the books today. I don't know if you all realize that, but that code is still on the books today. The only reason why they don't change it is because they're afraid that North Carolina wouldn't pass it, wouldn't amend it. And they don't want that stain to be on us, to be looked at as some state that we would still keep the literacy test, because the legislature actually believes that that people, if you just kind of explain, well, should you be literate to vote? And there'll be people across the state who don't really have an understanding of what actually happened, and they'll say, yeah, I guess you should, which is the most ridiculous thing that you could think about. Because what those guys did, and the third person there was his offsprings, they sold out to USA Today, but they owned the News and Observers, the Daniels family. And they decided that they were going to pass what they called literacy codes all across North Carolina. And they got together with a group, and they called this, and I learned this from a Tennessee State historian who did a study about a group called the Red Shirts. They started going throughout North Carolina when they were going to pass a constitutional amendment for the literacy codes to actually say that you had to be literate to vote. And they went out through black communities throughout North Carolina. This was 1990, 1900, which, if you remember, 2 years earlier, they had the Wilmington race riots, which really what that was a political play where they literally pulled the black people out. They literally pulled these black Republicans out of the state house, the courthouse, and said, hey, you're out of here. So they went in black neighborhoods with rifles and said, you're not going to go vote. And since they had more rifles than the folks who were there, the people said, well, I won't vote. That was a devastating situation. Do you know that there was 111 during that 25-year, 30-year process in our state legislature, and a number of United States congressmen? Do you know how many there was from 1900 to 1992 in the United States Congress from North Carolina? 0. 0. And so the value of that vote is the reason why I look at things like what has happened, with the civil rights movement, that I honor that, is because they literally transformed something that was almost a 100-year process. It's quite amazing, the courage and what people did. Last little bit of story. I talked to my father one time. Now, I've been studying history and went to school for history as a graduate teaching assistant in history. I never knew my dad was at the 1963 march in Washington, D.C. He never told me. He never thought it was a big deal. He just said, that's something that I had to do at that time for what we were going through at that moment. And so what I would say to us is, we have a similar type of situation here. Our vote is valuable. I have a friend here, he came up with a phrase, he said, think before you vote. So not only do we need to use that vote, we need to think about it, because that vote represents some power. And so it's a very interesting subject, but I wanted you all to see, when we're talking about what we had to go through in a very short time period that I have here to get that vote. It's valuable, and I say we protect it at all costs, because we can do something great in our country when we do things together. I'm going to turn it over to my friend, Craig Scott, who Craig is a kind of, I'll call him he's kind of a celebrity, not little. He's Newsweek, The Hill, all of those things, but there's a particular reason why. And so if you all will help me join with me and welcome Mr. Craig Scott.
Yeah, celebrity. Yeah, autographs will be handed out at the end of the program. Yeah. Like Mr. Kevrick said, my name is Craig Scott. I am an actor, filmmaker, and also militant activist. Yeah, I know some of y'all might not be comfortable with that, but let me talk to you about it a little bit, and maybe you'll begin to understand it. I was asked to come and speak with regard to the fact that I spent 26 years in federal prison due to my militant activism. Actually, I was sentenced to 52 years as a first-time offender for robbing banks, conspiracy to rob banks. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the Black Panther Party, the Black Liberation Army. They basically, one of the tactics that they used was to rob white-owned banks and use that money to finance political activity, political education, black cultural events, so forth and so on. So this was what I was participating in. I won't implicate anybody else. So in the course of that, I would be arrested and I would be sentenced to 52 years in federal prison. First-time offender, no one shot, no one injured, not a shot fired, nothing. But because of a draconian law passed by both Republican and Democrats, I have to keep it real. However, it was the architect of it is sitting in the White House as we speak. That's your man, or the people's Joe Biden. And Bill Clinton, of course, was the president who also pushed that terrible bill and law. It had a disproportionate, deadly effect, and that's just how the words I'm going to use, on our community, the Black American community. It was almost designed specifically for us. And that we can't even measure the amount of damage that that has done to our community. Personally, I'm still trying to put the pieces back together with regard to my family, with regard to community. Now, had I been sentenced to the law at how it was prior to the 1994 crime bill, I would have been sentenced to maybe 12 years. I was married, 2 children. We could do 10 years. I could kind of, we could make that work. But under that law, I would have to serve 52. There was no way I was to expect my wife to hang out for 40 to 50 years. So the law was literally designed to destroy Black families, and they know this. When you target basically the males of military age, you are in essence going to war with that community, and that's exactly what that law did. Now, in addition to that, of course, unfortunately for us here in America, Black people in America, the issue about citizenship and what does it mean to be a citizen for those of us who are descendant from Africans who were brought here and were made to serve as slaves. There was a very significant law or case law that was passed in 1857, and I want you to reread it, go over it, because they will have you to believe that the essence or the spirit of that case has been overturned and we've moved on from that, and I'm going to argue that no, actually we haven't. The name of the case is, they called it the Dred Scott decision. Scott versus Sanford, I believe, is the actual name of it. Long story short, the Supreme Court decided, now pay attention to this, not only could you not vote if you were a slave, you could not vote if you were a descendant of slaves. I want you to pay very close attention to that point. There are individuals in both parties who take the attitude that because we are, I'm talking about presently, right now, here today, because we are descendant of slaves, we don't have any rights that they are obligated to respect. And that was enumerated in that case. Case in point, former Senator Harry Reid. I know many of you probably have forgotten this, but I haven't. He was caught on a hot mic. That means he was being recorded without being realized. He didn't realize it. This was during the Obama campaign. And he was caught saying, oh, Obama, he's light-skinned. He doesn't have any strong Negro features. And when he talks, he doesn't talk like a Negro. And you know his mother's white. So we can support him. Now, he's not talking alone. He's in the company of other people. You don't hear a single person correct him. Oh, Harry, that's not right. What did you mean? No one's correct. He is literally voicing what the belief is of too many people in these parties and what they believe with regard to us and whether we are citizens. And this is affecting every decision that is being made. With the implementation of that draconian law, what they are doing is they are neutralizing our right to vote and then extending it with these long sentences. So our right to vote has always been under attack. Now we come to up to date. 2019 to 2020. Donald Trump introduces a law, or a law is introduced to him, and he says, listen, we've got to change that. We've got to overturn that. We've got to give an opportunity to these people that we have obviously wronged. So they passed a law called the First Step Act. And if it were not for that law, I would not be here talking to you now. I would not be here repairing my family. I would not be here visiting my daughter and my grandson, a year old now. I would not be here enjoying the actual freedoms of being a citizen. So I'm just laying that out as just one of the tactics that's been used in order to water our vote, dilute our vote, as Mr. Kevrick has said. So now, here comes another tactic. I want to go back again to the Dred Scott decision. Yeah, because the decision specifically dealt with us and said this doesn't apply to anybody else. What does that mean? That means that if anyone else comes to the country, we'll be more willing to recognize them as citizens than the descendants of slaves. And lo and behold, what are we facing today? Hey, come on over. We don't care if you're legal, if you're illegal, whatever. Here's your right to vote. Well, wait a minute. You haven't resolved the issue with your own black citizens about their right to vote, but you're going to give it to people just literally crossing the border? Not only is this a dilution of our vote, it is a total disrespect. And we've got to stop tolerating that. I don't care what party does it. We've got to call them out on it, and we've got to make them suffer at the polls about it. So now listen, I should have said this at the beginning. The views that are being expressed are not the views of Paul Jacobs or ACV, but they are of my own. But I want to thank Paul Jacobs for allowing me the opportunity and the platform to express this. And what I will not apologize for is the passion with which I'm speaking about this subject. Without passion, there's no action. We've got to become more passionate about issues like this. This stuff is threatening our political future and our political fate, and we've got to do something about it. Thank you so much.
Well, I'm gonna tell y'all, I'm fired up. I'm fired up, and you know, my job is to. My name is Timothy McKain from McKain Entertainment, and my job is to highlight the activists, the people who do work in the community, and one of those people is Craig Scott, right over there. So, round of applause for Craig Scott one more time. Another person who I have an incredible amount of respect for is this man sitting right here, Clarence Henderson, who I've come to know as a friend of mine. I'm a student of his. I'm listening to him, I'm learning. You know, we've had several conversations, and for me, we're talking about a man who at 18 stood up and made a decision to change the very fabric of this country. That's what he did. He helped propel, in my opinion, what was the biggest civil rights movement in American history. And so I like to first honor and recognize Clarence Henderson. I would like, you know, for you to just give us a few moments of your time right now. So thank you.
Craig, is this one of those mics again? Did he go somewhere? Is this one of those Harry Reid mics?
I think so. I think it might be. So, Mr. Henderson.
Yes, sir.
How did you get involved in the Woolworth movement?
That story is too long. We don't have enough time, but really, it came out of my mother's womb. I believe in divine intervention. When I was born, my father named me after the guy who he sharecropped for. He was a white guy. And they helped set the tone for me to help bridge the gap between the races So I've always been invited in, not that I volunteered, but I was invited in. So when I was a freshman at A&T State University, a guy by the name of Ezel Blair, who I started out in the first grade with, invited me to participate in the civil rights movement. There were 4 guys on February 1st that participated. And because I stayed off campus, I didn't know anything about it. And when I found out the second day, I became involved. The reason why I stayed off campus was because my parents couldn't afford for me to stay on campus. What triggered it was, this was the era time known as Jim Crow. And Jim Crow is another name for slavery.
Exactly.
And a lot of people don't understand that. But what actually happened was that when you see the picture of the 4 of us sitting at the lunch counter, the guy by the name of Joe McNeil had come from Wilmington for Christmas vacation, came into the bus station, which was downtown on Market Street in Greensboro. It was about 2 o'clock in the morning, and they had a restaurant there, and they wouldn't serve him. And so they had been talking about this before, and what happened was they made that decision they were going to do something about it. So that's when they went down on February 1st. And one of the challenges we have in this country is that we don't know the real history of this country. There was a guy by the name of Ralph John who helped instigate this. He was a Syrian guy that had gone through some things. He had a clothing store near A&T, and he had been trying for 11 years to get A&T student guys to participate in something that changed the plight of the blacks as far as this country is concerned.
That's powerful. So what is the importance of basically having a strong call to action? What is the importance of standing up?
Well, if you do nothing, nothing happens. And so it was based on what I'd gone through when I was growing up, being treated as a second-class citizen. Things such as when I attended Dudley High School. And during the summertime, a lot of guys would go to Wildwood, New Jersey to work and buy clothes that they didn't have in the southern states. So we looked different than other guys. And so I can remember when my mother finally let me go up there, I caught a Greyhound bus going up there. I had to stand up. Not because they were not in the seats, but because they were not in the seats in the back of the bus. So when people talk about racism and all these kind of things, I know exactly what that's all about. There are a number of things I've gone through. Now, for example, look at all the different names they've given us. We went from the N-word to Negro to black, and now we're African American. Who are we? The question is, we don't even know who we are. And so we've got to find that identity within ourselves and stop being, as Joe Biden said, monolithic thinkers, that we all think alike. And so I participated, and this was, again, the same thing as voting. I don't know how many people Ezel talked to before he got me to actually come and participate and sit in and change the course of history as far as America's concerned.
How did Jim Crow infiltrate public life for black Americans, including voting? How did they infiltrate us?
Well, you had Jim Crow was a pantomime, if you will, that the guy came up with derogatory toward blacks. And from Jim Crow, what came was black code, which meant that we were supposed to be separate but free, separate but the same, but we weren't. Case in point, I never went to an integrated school. I went to the black school all my life, not because there were not schools in close to the neighborhood where I live. I was even bused out of the neighborhood where I originally lived when I came to Greensboro. We moved over to near UNCG, and I would pass a number of schools, white schools, going to the black school, J.C. Price, at that particular point in time. And so these are the kinds of things that I saw growing up, whereby that we were treated as second-class citizens in this country called the United States. So what I try to tell people now is that understand what America was founded for versus what the people think it was founded for. because if we would live according to what it was founded for, which is a self-evident truth that we're all created equal, and our rights come from God and not from man and not from the Constitution. And the Constitution recognizes rights. It does not give us rights.
Do you believe granting non-citizens the right to vote dilutes the sacrifice of black Americans and their sacrifice in voting in this country?
It definitely does, because see, what happens is that you have a people that come here that don't know anything about this country, and they've been told how to vote, as opposed to looking at what's the right way to vote. And a lot of times they're voting against themselves, as opposed to voting for themselves. So, and what we live, you have the rule of man versus the rule of law. And so the rule of law is what holds this country together, even to the point when you have a wrong law, then we have a right to change it, like we did with Jim Crow, by exercising what the Constitution says, that we have the right to peaceably assemble and change what America is all about. So what we have now is that what is actually happening with the illegal citizen coming in, they're trying to make America be a one-party system. And a lot of people don't understand that. They're bringing them in saying that you must have allegiance to this certain party, basically the Democratic Party. If illegal aliens were coming in, they were going toward the Republican Party, they closed the border down today.
Would you support a constitutional amendment in explicitly stating that only citizens can vote?
The Constitution is rule of law. And when an exception becomes a rule, you don't have the rule. The standard is the standard. You don't change the standard. That takes away the integrity of this country, and the very reason why these people are coming over here is because of the freedoms they have that they don't have in their country. And so what they're trying to do is use it and say that we are discriminating against black folks when we say we got to have photo ID, not voter ID, but photo ID, because you're taking away their right to vote. But actually what we're doing is that we're opening the door for people to feel like they're obligated to vote a certain way. And so now with the Constitution stating specifically what makes you eligible to vote, we're taking that away. And so will America become that country that people are leaving as opposed to coming to? Because people are coming here because they come for the opportunity. So we have to recognize what this country was founded for the kind of freedom that we've had during all this time, and that's being taken away even as we sit here.
February 2nd, 1961, you and your friends led a very strong call to action. What would you tell the new generation to have that same strong call to action to make a change? Because you guys helped change the very fabric of this country. What can we do to have that same strong call to action?
Well, it's no different now than it was then. People are people. And when you talk about freedom, what actually you have to look at is that freedom is not free. There's a price that must be paid. It must be paid in full. It must be paid up front. And so there's still things in this country where people are not recognizing what the laws of this land say, and we've got to make sure that we hold a government accountable, because governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, and that's why voting is so important. And we need to understand who to vote for. We need to know how to vote, how to vet the people that we're voting for, that will preserve what this country stands for. And so what we have right now is we have people in this country that are fighting against themselves, not recognizing that this is the only place they're going to ever be. And if you don't defend this country, what are you going to defend? And so that's why I take the stand is that I'm not upset with any white person based upon what they did in times past. I deal with the element and the environment we have here right now, whereby that if you're going to try to take away my rights, I don't care whether you're black, white, red, or yellow, Democrat, Republican, you got a problem with me. And so our challenge now is to make sure that this country remains the viable entity that it is right now. And I would recommend that everyone in this room read The Rise and Fall of the Roman Empire. We're right in the middle of that right now, and most people in this country don't understand that, and they don't understand how close we are to this country being divided. It's like what Brother Craig said a few minutes ago, and a lot of people that voted for Joe Biden and that crime bill, here's what he said. He said it would hang me and you for everything except for jaywalking. Now, how do you vote for a guy that has that kind of prejudice against people that look like us? How do you have a guy that you vote for that says that if you don't vote for me, you ain't black? That's the color I came here. So the point being is that there's integrity that has that lives out as far as vote is concerned. Thomas Jefferson said, "America's an idea in the minds of men." What that means is that we as citizens are to decide how this country goes by going to the polls and voting as to what kind of country we want to have. And unfortunately, we have too many people that are not voting, or they're voting according to what other people tell them that they should vote for, or they take the attitude that my vote doesn't count. Ask Chief Justice Newby if votes don't count. He is the Chief Justice of the state of North Carolina by some 300 votes, I understand. And so, because of who we have voted for almost some 3 years ago or so ago, what we have in this country right now, a lot of dangerous zones, infiltration, what's going on over in Jerusalem, Israel, what's going on over in Ukraine would not be going on if we had the right kind of leadership. So the citizens' right to vote that want to defend this country are the ones that we should be looking forward to voting as far as keeping this country what it should be.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So first, I want to thank you. I want to thank you, thank Paul. I want to thank Craig for all the great speaking sessions that we've had today. We're now about to move into the Q&A. So I would like my father to come up here and Paul so we can move on with the questions. Questions and answers. Oh, you carry the mic? Okay, cool. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. I'll walk around.
So you're going to lead?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Does anyone have any questions?
One, I want to thank Craig, because Craig didn't, where is he? Yeah, he about to roll out on us. His story, we've met, but he didn't tell his story, so I'm glad he got a chance to give us that in his perspectives. But, and I'm just going to be straight up, you mentioned Joe Biden. I want to talk character, because if you're saying there's only 2 on the ballot currently, there's some independents and some folks coming up. So let's just be straight up. The other guy lacks morals beyond belief. So you gave us 2 scenarios. One had to do with Craig and one had to do with what you just spoke about. Are you saying there's a better option and the other option is Don? Or what exactly are you saying? Or we need to be doing something different? Because the call to action was we need to talk about this, but I need some more direction as it relates to that. Or more information. Ain't like you're going to tell me what to vote for, but I would like to hear more information as it relates to what we need to be a part of our evaluation process.
Is that question directed to him or me?
I'm going to start with you.
Okay.
Good
Because
question.
you look like me. I want to hear what you got to say. He told me. But go ahead.
Well, let me say this. Donald Trump reminds me of my drill sergeant. Now, what do I mean by that? He tells us what we need to do in reference to keeping this country the great country it was founded to be. Now, as far as character is concerned, we all have character flaws.
94?
Well, you can call it whatever number you want to call it. But the bottom line is and Craig talked about it, what policies did he put in place? I'm not caught up in what he says, I'm caught up in what he has done. I'm caught up in the fact that what I'm paying for gas now versus what I paid for gas then. Now, if I'm looking to where I expect to go when I leave here, I won't be looking at Donald Trump. And that simply means that when I leave this earth, I'll be looking for who I believe in was the Lord God Almighty. But as far as directing this country, then we have to realize who is in favor of this country. I don't know whether Donald Trump is president or not. He may be. But I do know that Joe Biden is. And I do know that we need a leadership. And Donald Trump has been in all those countries that we're dealing with right now. And see, it's very restrictive as to what the president is supposed to do according to the Constitution. A lot of things that presidents are doing, and include Donald Trump, are outside the scope of what their responsibility is. That's where we as citizens of this country have to be responsible enough to hold them accountable. It won't be tomorrow because we've allowed too much free reign with them that they think that they tell us what to do as opposed to what us telling them what they are to do. There's a responsibility that we have that we're not taking that responsibility for. So I had a choice 4 years ago. I have a choice in November. That choice will depend on who is there that I can vote for that I believe that will help continue to protect this country.
So, and I ain't trying to be funny, but when you talk to moral character of a person, and you talk about putting them in office, and you say that one's not a racist, but he doesn't allow you to protest freely, that has nothing to do with racism. He didn't want to go and relinquish authority, called on the January 6th invasion, and you sit before me and say that you have a problem. Now, again, I would prefer to be independent, so I'm just challenging you on how do you say Joe Biden is a racist and I could care less, but everything you saying versus 91 things that they're saying now, along with what we've all seen, you are telling me that you don't know that Donald Trump is a racist?
No.
And he has zero.
His actions don't tell me that. Now, here's the reason for it. When I look at 2020, how can we prosecute those people on January 6th and not prosecute those people in 2020 that were rioting? They were not doing peaceful demonstrations.
No. So some were not doing peaceful demonstrations. The white guy that shot 2 other white guys wasn't peaceful. But the people standing at the gate asking for an opportunity to speak their mind, Black Lives Matter, that wasn't everybody. So tell me again how you compare them to the folks that went into the White House after assaulting all of the people that had guns and had a badge, standing to keep them out.
The law says, here's the thing, the only way we were successful in the civil rights moves, the law said that we could peaceably assemble. Now, whenever you have an occasion where there are people that are rioting and having peaceful demonstrations, then they should be handled accordingly. Where we are right now is that we are at the point of perhaps martial law, and we don't even recognize it. See, I just turned 83 years of age. There's some things I can tell you that I have seen that show us where we are. There's no law that you have that can cause a change a person's heart. It is the actions that I've seen from Donald Trump. And I just said before, I don't know whether he's prejudiced or not. that is not the question for me. The question for me is his actions. His actions, because he put a $500 billion plan in place for the black community, and what happened to it? What did he do with it for the HBCU that Joe Biden has not done? So when I look at all these actions, a person can say one thing, but when they do something else, for me, when I look at an independence like me straddling the fence, I'm gonna go on one side or the other. That's my choice. And I go on that side based upon what the platform says. The platform of the Democratic Party says one thing, the platform of the Republican Party says another thing. I cannot go in that direction of saying that there's no such thing as traditional marriage, there's no such thing as pro-life, when you had, in 1960, you had 20 million blacks in this country. And since that time, we've had 20 million black babies aborted. Who has supported that except for the Democratic Party? So
I think,
they have
hey,
a choice.
I think this, okay, and I want to wrap a bow on this one. So is two things. One is ACV is not about President Trump or President Biden. It's not about that. And so I want to, I understand the passion on both of these, but I want to get us back to.
I love you, brother.
I want to get us back to that particular topic. Okay, so and there's not that much time that we have left. So, so I wanted to ask. There are a couple other questions that I think folks have here, and let's go there. And I appreciate the conversation, but frankly, this is one that I feel like there's, people are like dug in on this one. So I want to keep us moving. So Ali, Tim.
So the question that I have is around the policy side of it, and the question I have is around the policy side of it, and obviously as someone who talks to the legislature a lot, how do we as everyday average people get to the point of lighting that fire under our legislature, given all of this extraneous stuff going on? Because yeah, Israel's important, true. Crime, the border, all of that's important, true. But it's apparent that there is another voter class being brought into this country by folks who have nothing but power on their agenda. So what can the average person who doesn't really care about politics but wants to honor the sacrifice that people made, what can we do in the next 3 months or 2 weeks or tomorrow to get to light a fire under our legislatures to take this issue seriously?
Boy, I like that question. Well, that's a very good question because it's the operative question. I haven't talked to anybody in the legislature who doesn't say this is the right policy, that it ought to be citizen-only voting. So you would think that's the end of the debate then. It doesn't take long to say, hey, let's everybody vote, and then vote, then we take it, put it on the ballot, the people get to vote. But legislatures are a lot tougher than that because oftentimes, they're weighing the controversial issues, and sometimes that takes their look off of stuff that's pretty simple to solve. And I think what legislators are likely to say on this issue is, it's not really a problem yet. We've got to focus on other things. And they do have to focus on other things. They got to be able to walk and chew gum. But that's not an argument to not do this. This is the easy stuff. And we see again and again this, we're for it, but we're not going to vote for it and let the people have control of it. So you got to contacting your rep, your senator, and saying, this is a simple, straightforward issue. North Carolinians are united in favor of it. Get this done. And don't take the excuses and so on of, well, we've got other stuff we're focusing on. Well, then focus on it. Pass this and start focusing on it.
Yeah, and the one thing I do want to say on this, the legislature, and I'll be, so we can really be clear here, the legislature actually has what they call a short session. They were in session, where they were, Yeah, I'm from Rockingham County, so they were talking about trying to have, because we like to, my wife and I, we laugh about it. We call it the Cino, but they spent a long time with that budget process. But they are coming back for what's called a short session, and in that short session, they can pass some laws that actually would put this on the ballot in November. It would be just like any other ballot initiative that you might see. There might be something that says, hey, this lake is supposed to be a natural, something historical that we use, okay? We want to actually put on the ballot in November a change to the Constitution that's in your packet. Very simple, okay? And so it's just a one-word change that says only. Why? Because the state of my home state, New York, has some issues with that. Where a lot of my friends are in D.C., they had the same exact language. And so what we're asking is that the legislature would put that on the ballot in November. And then our aim is that you would vote for it. Now, this isn't something that we've done some polling on that. We've been out to hit about 97,000 African Americans in North Carolina, from Fayetteville to Raleigh to Charlotte to a little small place called Kannapolis and Concord, and polled black people with those questions. Said, would you support a constitutional change, and do you believe in having non-citizens vote? It's actually in the high 80s that say, one, we don't believe that that non-citizens should vote, and two, we would support a constitutional amendment that would do that. I mean, we directly went to their homes and asked that question. And so that's our desire actually here, is that we can get in that and have that be a part of the process. So one more question. I think we've got time for two more, actually. Gotcha. No, the gentleman back there was first. Gotcha. And then we'll come to this.
I have an unusual issue to raise. It is what I call the issue of debt slavery. And if you study the history of banking in the United States of America, we are forced to borrow all of our money into existence through the Federal Reserve and the banking system. And Senator Dick Durbin years ago has said that, frankly, the banks control Washington, D.C. And if you watch where the money goes, I have started asking who buys our vote with the benefits they offer through the vote. The government, and I'm not going to say which party, but there's one party that freely hands out a lot of benefits. And for those of us who are in debt and are receiving those benefits, they are buying our vote. And we need to be really careful about who we are in debt to. Now, just one example, you've never heard of the Need Act of 2011. What it would have done is it would have replaced the Federal Reserve debt-based money with money created freely in the Treasury, like President Lincoln initiated, and that free money existed until 1996 when the debt-based bankers took it over. The challenge there is that the Need Act included $10,000 of money for every citizen in this room and would have allowed us to pay off national debt as it came due each year. But none of you ever heard of the Need Act of 2011. You can go to the legislative listing, lis.gov, and you can look up the Need Act of 2011 and read the text, and it's in there. It says we need to create money free of charge in the Treasury and not create it through the banking system, which will keep us in debt. And the reason it keeps us in debt is because it creates the principal of the money, but there's never any money created to cover the interest. So we're always creating a debt that can never be paid. And so we're always going to be controlled by our debt. And I just want to put that out there. It's like, if we are in debt to the man, we don't even know who the man is anymore. And I will let that, and the gentleman here who was robbing the banks for the good of the Lord and the work of the people, you know, I can't fault the man for that. But we need to pay attention to where the money gets created and who holds the debt over us, because whoever controls the money controls the world these days. And that's all I'm going to say. And I want my $10,000.
Understood. Yes, sir.
Thank you. My name is Christopher Jackson. I'm CEO of Smart Technology. We're a manufacturing company. I was just listening to you when you said I was just listening to you, sir, when you were saying that you've done a lot of polling in the North Carolina area, and me trying to wrap my mind around everything that's going on about citizen voting, I agree with that. And I was wondering how much polling was done in white neighborhoods or white neighborhoods of finding out how do they perceive this to be in citizen voting only.
I think it's a good question. If you look in your packet, there's a series of polling data that's in the packet. Now that polling data actually, it's actually of the whole state. Oh, let me see. I think I need that for this streaming thing here. That polling data is for the whole state, okay? But it is actually segregated by population totals. So black folks are 20% of the population. So that polling data that's in that packet that you have would demonstrate that. But by and large, across racial lines, it's pretty consistent that you see that it's basically in the low 80s, high 70s. That you see. I can tell you, and just to be clear about it, you do see a smaller, in more rural areas of North Carolina, particularly when you deal with in the African American communities, it's about 4 or 5% higher than what you saw that was in Charlotte, Mecklenburg, and particularly in the Raleigh, as you were. I can't remember what the zip code is, but it's one of those zip codes that are over by the universities. There's like as you're probably looking at it was more of thank you. It's more about like 78 in some of the urban centers, but by and large, where black folks are is about where everybody else is. It pretty much polls that way in North Carolina.
I had hold on. The reason why I brought that question up is because this is very important, just for America, period, is to have only citizens, vote. But the concern I have is that if we're only concerned about U.S. citizen voting, why is there such a big push to suppress African American votes and for us to jump through all these hoops to vote when we should be allowed to vote? But you have so many parties, so many laws, so many governors, everybody trying to change the rules when it comes to African Americans to vote. But on this issue, we want everybody to only have citizens to vote. So I'm trying to figure out. It's like it's a hidden agenda to me of why you trying to keep African Americans from voting, but then you want just only citizens of the United States to vote. So it's just confusing to me.
I'm going to answer this twice, okay, in two ways, okay. One, I'm going to give you in terms of, I was at an event, and I can see how you might think that, okay, and say that, is because the reality is that We have a United States Senator today that was largely elected because if you feel, and if you want to just talk pure politics, just pure politics here. We have a United States Senator today in North Carolina that was largely elected because the black percentage of the vote was not the same as it was for whites. If Shirley Beasley had gotten, if black folks, as they currently are voting, had gotten the same percentage as white people, she'd have beat Ted Budd. I mean, just let's be blunt about this, okay? But I don't see that as the same as, because I am from New York, in New York, because I think what you're talking about is, well, they require me to have a driver's license. Okay, I mean, I'm just talking in North Carolina. That's what people say is restrictive. Okay, I don't consider that, and I know I'm walking down a trail here, but I don't consider actually saying, hey, you got to have an ID. When I would go up to Syracuse when I moved there after I graduated from college, and they required me. In New York's, I think probably New York has been as good historically to any minority group, particularly black folks, as anybody, okay? When it comes to voting, when it comes to the ability to vote, and a place that people would go to leave the South. And my family was one of those, okay? So I don't consider, and this is Kevrick McKain. This is not Americans for Citizens Voting. This is Kevrick McKain. I don't see, if I have to go and providing some providing some identification as a draconian type of thing for me, okay? Not when I gotta go and present my ID to cash a check, to go, when I was under 17, to go to the movies, okay?
There's a large amount of blacks that don't have checks to cash or don't have IDs. So that doesn't mean that they're less than.
You're right, it doesn't.
They don't have a check to cash. So the scenario can go on and on and on.
It doesn't, but what it does, the legislature actually, I think, and I'm not a defender of the Republican legislature, but I think the legislature has provided a number of options for folks for the process, okay? And so I don't see it in that way. I don't mind to disagree, okay? But I don't see that now as the same type of thing, because I think the legislature has taken into account a number of things. But if you are asking me candidly, okay, are people, if votes are the same, are people, do they assume on the political side that the more black people that vote, the more challenge it's going to be for certain parties? Yeah, I mean, you'd be crazy if you didn't see that. But this issue is not that, okay? This issue is not, this is a nonpartisan, but I wanted to answer your question, and I wanted to be as straightforward and as honest about it as I could be, okay? Because I think there shouldn't be a lot of spin on this one, okay? This one is going to be at the bottom of the ballot after everything else that you vote for. And at the bottom of that ballot, I think it's important that we have people who actually have a stake in the country vote on the issue. And that's what this one is about, okay?
I just wanted to connect kind of some of the sentiment you're expressing with some of the sentiment you're expressing, and you're back and forth here. I didn't vote for Donald Trump in 2016. I thought he earned my vote by what he did. I can't stand him. I mean, he's just not I don't want my kids to be like him. I don't want to be like him. I don't want to meet anybody like him. But he blew up some of the crap going on in Washington. And I like that. So I voted for him. And then, by golly, within about a month, I was sorry I did. And I was sorry I did because there's nothing more important. All the laws that we've written, probably nothing more important in the history of this country than George Washington stepping down after 2 terms and saying, here's the power, I'm handing it back. And that means everything. So what do we have? Well, everything Clarence said about Joe Biden, I think, is true. And we're constantly in this. We cannot allow the politicians to line us up in blue and red, and then we fight for them. That's not what we're trying to get to. And we get these choices that are just horrific choices. I mean, Hillary versus Trump, and you go back and they weren't that great before, but the last couple cycles, my goodness. So this is not about Republican or Democrat, but it is about us having a political system that we control instead of they control. And it's not about Biden or Trump.
Right.
Because if you replace Biden and Trump, we still have the same problem that they want to say this is a free democratic system, but they don't really want to give up that power. They don't really want the voters to decide if they're not going to decide the way they want. Yeah. And so when Republican legislators talk about election reform, I would be skeptical. When Democratic legislators, when the Congress was talking about the Right to Vote Act and so on, when Democrats were in control of the Congress, do you know that stuck into that, like a zillion other things stuck into that, was a provision that made it no longer a prosecutable crime to register a non-citizen to vote, or for that non-citizen to register to vote in states that it was illegal? There's all kinds of, what I'm saying is, we can't trust the Republican Party or the Democratic Party. We're not going to get a choice for president that's the perfect guy. And I've gotten to where I'm not going to give anybody a hard time about voting for anybody, because we're all trying to defend ourselves in a system in which there's no perfect choices. But we have to stay united on basic democracy and not allow the parties and the big shot politicians to separate us out. And so let's agree to disagree on some of these things, but let's look for bedrock things that can help us get to a better place. And one of the things I love about this issue, the whole immigration issue, doesn't work for America. No. But you know what? It works for Republicans and it works for Democrats, because they've got their audiences that they're going to speak to. We have to avoid getting caught up in that, and we have to work together to look for what works for everybody. And I don't mean that we're all going to win, because we're not going to all win. I mean, I voted for one guy in my whole life who's won, and I still regret it. So it wasn't long after he'd won that I thought maybe this wasn't such a good thing. Anyway, the bottom line is, the more we are in control of this, the better. And this is an issue that allows us to take control. That's the whole point of putting it in the Constitution, is that then we control it.
Are you saying we the people?
We the people of North Carolina. I don't have any say whatsoever. But exactly, we the people. In other words, when it's in the Constitution, they can't change it without coming back to us. And that's why not everything doesn't belong in the Constitution. But this is basic, bedrock, who gets to vote, and that does belong in the Constitution.
Let me say something real quick. We are not victims. We are not survivors. We're overcomers. Kevrick talked about it earlier. We overcame slavery, overcame Jim Crow. This small thing we're talking about as far as voting is concerned, voter ID, whatever, that's not difficult to overcome. Whatever it says it needs to be done, we need to do it. We find a way to do everything else.
Well, I want to thank all the panelists. Let's thank all of them. Let's thank all of them. Thank all of them. Thanks to everyone who came out and attended ACV. If you have any questions, please reach out to my father or Paul Jacobs for any questions. Thank you so much for attending.
Submitted.